Okay, see some more people coming in. So let's go ahead and get started. I did want to let everyone know that we are recording this session. We will be emailing out the recording and a copy of the slides to everyone to have or to share with your colleagues. And we also will be taking questions during the webinar and at the end today. So if you have any questions, please submit them in the comments or in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring them and then we'll be sure to get to all of them, hopefully during or at the end. So let's go ahead and introduce our speaker today, Dr. Tim Oates. He is the co-founder and chief data scientist at Synaptic with over 20 years of experience in guiding organizations and companies of all sizes, applying AI and machine learning to business problems across industry. Dr. Oates earned his PhD in computer science from University of Massachusetts Amherst with a focus in AI and machine learning and was a postdoctoral fellow at the MIT AI Lab. Thank you Tim for joining us today and for speaking, and I will let you take it from here.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it, Sam. So I'm going to start out with one slide just talking about Synaptic briefly, and then I'll head over to an outline of what I'm going to be talking about today. So when I characterize Synaptic, I always say we're an AI, machine learning, data science consulting company. And that's the way we started out about 10 years ago. It was all very much somebody comes to us with a problem they're having, they want to use AI or machine learning to solve it, and we did that. Over time, though, as we grew and got larger clients, they had more needs. And so we expanded out to do much more data engineering. So moving the data around and getting it into a format that's appropriate for applying AI and machine learning tools. And then also user experience design. So these days, we kind of characterize ourselves as building intelligent products. So it starts with a problem or a pain point, typically. And almost everything we do, there's an AI or a machine learning component to it, but we try and build ecosystems in which data is driving benefit for our clients. So really quick about Synaptic. So here's what we're going to talk about today. The first topic is AI and X. And by that, I mean, today I'm talking about AI in the legal profession. Last month, I did a webinar on AI and construction. Next, I'm going to do AI and healthcare. But in all of those discussions and all those webinars, it's always AI means large language models, so things like ChatGPT. So one thing I'll do is I'll start out with just a few slides kind of talking about large language models, a little bit about how they work, because I think that's important so that you can kind of understand why they behave the way they do. And that provides some insight into when is a language model going to be useful and when might a language model have challenges. Then we'll look at some reasons based on that as to why LLMs might be really useful. And again, when I say AI and LLM, I mean the same thing for the rest of this talk, for most of the rest of this talk. So why might LLMs be useful in the legal profession? And then are there cases where you need to be a little bit careful? And I've got a very simple example of that. Then we'll just talk about some applications that seem very clearly relevant. So looking at contracts, analyzing them, extracting information, and then potentially drafting contracts. Legal research, so looking at case law, sorting through large volumes of text to try and understand how it might be relevant to a case. We'll talk briefly about legal chatbots, which is really sort of an interesting area, especially when it comes to the law, where you need the responses to be accurate, faithful, well understood by the people who are consuming them. And then I'll end up with a case study in the immigration space that Synaptic did with a client a number of years ago. We're still working with them, and just sort of understanding how that project has changed through the years is kind of nice. So then I'll have some concluding thoughts. So as I said, I want to just start out talking about AI and X. And by that, I mean, anytime you say AI applied to a thing, these days it means large language models applied to that thing. Now, we still do plenty of work. There's still a lot of room for machine vision and predictive analytics, and we do a lot of that stuff on a day-to-day basis. Although those things are increasingly getting sort of sucked up into the world of large language models, so there are vision language models that are really good at processing images and then extracting information from them. But for the moment, let's just think about a large language model. And so all an LLM is, even though they're really complicated, the thing that they do is relatively straightforward to describe and understand. So you give a large language model like GPT or GPT-4o in this case is the example I'm thinking of, some text. So you give it a document, or you give it a document plus some instructions as to what you want it to do. And all that language model does, even though it's an amazing feat, is it says, well, of all the words that I could generate next, what's the probability that any of these words is the right word to generate? And I'll show that graphically on the next slide. But it really is, I'm going to give you some text, and it says, well, of all the words I know, what's the probability that I should pick any one of those words? You can imagine in the simplest case, it picks the most probable. It gets a little bit more complicated than that, but not a lot. So, um, another important thing to keep in mind is how big these things are. So, GPT-4o, though OpenAI doesn't disclose precise numbers about their architectures, you can Google how many parameters does GPT-4o have, and you'll come up with tons of articles. The best estimate is it has 1.8 trillion parameters. And so, what's a parameter? Parameter is just a real number, and there are 1.8 trillion of those. And what GPT does is when you give it some text, it does computations involving those 1.8 trillion numbers to say, oh, well, how likely is it that the next word is cat or dog or cell phone, right? So the interesting thing is that all of the knowledge, like everything that model knows, is captured in those 1.8 trillion parameters. Now, given that many numbers that it has to set to get good behavior, because imagine if I gave you 1.8 trillion spots to write real numbers, um, the vast majority of ways you could fill out those real numbers is going to give you garbage output. So the thing that is driving this and making it work is that you can take trillions of tokens or trillions of words that have been scraped from the web, documents. The best estimate I've seen is about 8 or 9 trillion words of text that were fed into GPT-4o to train it, right? So again, the model knows an amazing amount of stuff, but it's all stored in those 1.8 trillion parameters. So, the way these things work, and again, I'll sort of bring home why this is relevant in a second, is you go, oh, well, if I say Paris is the city, that's some text, right? I hand that to a thing that goes, oh, I know Paris, I know I know and I know the city. It's these words. I'm going to treat them as numbers that I feed into the language model. And what it does is it has outputs, one for every possible word. So there might be 50,000 words that it could generate next. And it just ranks them and says, how probable are they? So if I say Paris is the city, it goes, of is highly probable. Where is kind of probable. There are lots of other words that are going to be very improbable. So if I say Paris is the city and the model generates of, now some text is Paris is the city of, and maybe lights is the word that we generate. If I said Paris is the city and where, um, and that was the word that was generated. Maybe where the Louvre is located is going to be the next thing. So the thing to keep in mind is it has text, it generates next word, and then that influences the words that it generates as it moves forward. So that some text can contain lots of different things. It could contain legal opinions, right, in the context of the legal profession, relevant case law. It could be the text of a subpoena that you've received or that you're sending to someone. It could be a batch of emails or texts that were collected as part of discovery. So it can be a lot of information that is content in the domain, or it could be instructions on what you want to get out of that text or what the format should look like. It could be a sequence of intermediate results that are generated, or very interestingly, there are some new models like DeepSeek, which you might have heard about, where that intermediate information is sort of the model kind of thinking about what it's doing. It's like, oh, okay, I think I'm going to, sort of put these two pieces of information together and get a result, and then that's going to help me make progress towards solving the problem. So why use these language models in the legal profession? Now, I start out with a disclaimer. Clearly, I am not a lawyer, but the way I think about law is it involves a lot of text and a lot of reasoning. So, my wife's cousin is a corporate tax attorney, and the way he characterizes it, he likes it because he says it's like solving a puzzle, right? I've got all this information, and I'm trying to, within the confines of what the law allows me to do, to maximize the benefit for my client. And so it's like putting a puzzle together, is the way he says it. So, why LLMs in the legal profession, just looking at the lots of text lens? Well, suppose somebody hands you a large contract. There's a 200-page contract. What you might like to do is to get a summary of it. Can I get a high-level overview of what's in here? And can I dive down into some of the details? And we'll actually do that with a language model in just a few minutes. What I might also like to do is to extract information. So beyond just sort of interacting with an LLM to get a handle on a big document, maybe I've got emails and I want to build a database of who sent it, who got it, what's the topic, and what's the date that it was sent on. You could also imagine doing question answering. So I get a new compliance regulation. How does that affect my client? Do I need to worry about this? What are the implications of it? You can also think about writing documents. So suppose what I've done is I've got a contract, I've extracted some information from it, and I'd like to write some email to someone asking for more information or interacting in some other way about that contract. Then I can use the information I've extracted to write documents. Simple example might, oh, maybe I write a legal brief based on facts of the case and relevant case law. So lots of reasons. So the thing to think about LLMs is that they are unbelievably smart, very capable assistants when it comes to ingesting text, extracting information from it, summarizing it, or taking information and producing relevant kind of cogent text on the backside. So now, the other part of the legal profession is reasoning. And so, one thing that you probably need to worry about a little bit is, are LLMs going to sort of produce sound logical arguments? And so, here's a very dumb example, but just bear with me for a second. So, here's a problem that I posed to Chat GPT 4.0, and I did this a couple of days ago. So, it's suppose I have a cabbage, a goat, and a lion, and I need to get them across a river. I have a boat that can carry myself and one thing. And so I've got the cabbage, the goat, and the lion on one side of the river. I got to get them all three to the other side of the river. And the rules are I can't leave the cabbage and the goat together because the goat will eat the cabbage, and I can't leave the lion and the goat together because the lion will eat the load. Eat the goat, sorry. So I said, how do I get all three across? Now, think about how you as a human would solve that problem. You might go, okay, I don't know, maybe let me take the cabbage across. So put the cabbage in the boat and I take it across. That leaves the lion and the goat. That's bad because the goat's going to get eaten. Maybe what I'll do is I'll take the lion across. Well, that leaves, that leaves the goat and the cabbage. And now the cabbage gets eaten. So kind of looks to me like I need to take the goat, right? So you can sort of work this thing through and go, all right, I can come up with a solution to it relatively quickly. But notice what you're doing is you're sort of thinking through options in your head, which is hard for just a native language model because it's just doing like next word, and it's just start saying stuff. And if it says the wrong thing to start with, it's trapped in a corner. So here's what ChatGPT 4.0 said is it goes, you can solve this puzzle step by step with careful planning. So it says, take the line across first and leave it on the other side. But notice it's already left the goat and the cabbage over there. And so the cabbage has been eaten. And, it goes back and forth and says, go back along, take the goat across next, right? Bring the lion back with you and so on. So, and now all three, the cabbage, the goat, and the lion are safely across the river without any rule violation. So the point of this sort of slightly silly exercise is what you need to do is think about, are you asking the language model to do things that involve reasoning over content? And if you really care about the outcome of that reasoning, if it needs to be precise and accurate and well supported, you have to be a little bit careful. All right, so let's dive into a couple of examples. And a lot of this is going to be sort of us looking at what GPT 4.0 can do, and I think for good reason. So think about contract analysis and drafting. So there are lots of products out there that make pretty bold claims. So here's one, Evisort, AI-powered contract analytics and search for the enterprise. So we're getting actionable insights at scale. Now, the at scale thing is important. So, and we'll talk about products in just a minute. what we'll see, and maybe you've played around with, is that you can do a lot just in an interactive session with an online language model. If you want to do things at scale, it's a slightly different issue, right? So we've got powerful AI, next generation processing with OCR and foreign language support, right? So, we're going to help you analyze contracts. We've also got precision contract review for the enterprise, complex contract reviews into confident, lightning fast processes with AI that scales, right? So again, the idea is products are going to give you scale. GPT 4.0 is really fast as well. Confident is also an important aspect here. So is a language model going to give you the confidence that you need to trust the results? And then you can see, maybe it's not that hard because Adobe Acrobat's going to do that for you for $5 a month, right? So break down complex languages and language and contracts, summarize your docs in a click, ask questions and get quick answers, right? $5 a month, you get a plug-in to Acrobat that's going to do that for you. So vastly different kinds of claims. But what we'll see is that the reason you could probably do it for $5 a month is because the language model out of the box can really help you with it. So let's look at what you can do with Chat GPT. So I don't know if you've played around with this functionality, but if you get a Chat GPT and you click on the little plus sign here, you can upload a document. You can connect it to Google Drive and OneDrive. But in this case, what I did was I found a document. I called it Legal Document One PDF. Turns out that there's an online data set of legal contracts of example documents. And so I just want to show you what's possible in the context of Chat GPT. And again, this is GPT 4.0. So I said, what kind of legal document is this? Respond with just the type of document using one or two words at most. And so what I was hoping it would do is just say contract. It ignored my instructions, which they tend to do, and it said joint venture agreement. That's fine. 3 words is only one more than two. But now I know nothing. I just uploaded legal document one and it goes, oh, it's a joint venture agreement. Now, then I can start engaging in information extraction. So, and then I said, who are the parties involved in this agreement? Respond with the name of each party on a separate line. So I did that. I provided, here's my information needed, and then here's some information about how I would like it to be formatted. Because what I was thinking is it might be nice to be able to get this stuff extracted into a representation that would allow me to get metadata about this contract loaded into a database. Then I said, what's the name of the joint venture? And it's Mighty Cell Batteries. So now I know I've got a couple of companies, could have been more, I suppose, and they're forming a joint venture and I have the names of them. But again, this is just all off the shelf, and all GPT 4.0 is doing is it's taking that PDF, it's extracting the text from it. And when a language model extracts the text, it tries to kind of keep it formatted in a way where section headers are kept and things like that. So then I can ask more information about how will the income be divided. Notice that it says the income and losses are going to be divided equally, 50-50 between the two companies involved in the joint venture. And then I can start asking about dates. No formatting, but if I wanted to, I said, what's the duration of the joint venture? And it says it's going to start on March 1st, 2003, end February 28th, 2004, unless extended by a written agreement. Notice, interestingly enough, that the bolding that's done here is actually done by the language model. So it's identifying the things that it believes are important. If I wanted to, I could modify that prompt and have it extract the dates in a particular format and potentially have that information ingested into a database as well. Now, then things kind of get interesting. And this was my very weak attempt at saying, okay, I'm going to write a new contract. So I've got a new joint venture between ABC company and XYZ company. They're going to form a new company called 123. They're going to manufacture widgets. And so what I'm saying is I've got an example of a contract that I've written in the past. And what I would like you to do is to construct a new contract that looks a lot like that one. So the other thing I did was I said, ask me questions about any additional information you may need. And it goes, okay, like here's a draft. I've structured it based on your uploaded document with your new details. But then it comes back and goes, okay, hey, I want to know where the new company is going to be headquartered. Are they going to contribute capital? How are they going to split the profits and losses, and a bunch of other information? So now in this very interactive way, what I did was, and I won't show it here, is I went and provided all that information, and then it constructed a new document for me. So it gave me a contract. So It goes from let me upload a document, I'm going to start asking a bunch of questions about it, to let me use that document as a template. And the language model is smart enough to know what are the things that are going to be different potentially with this new situation. So, what are some considerations here? The sort of like, am I going to use just an open source thing? And one idea or one issue that I'm not touching on here is actually data privacy and security, which is important, right? So if I were a lawyer and I were exploring contracts, you're not going to load that into ChatGPT, but there are many models that you can run completely locally, or you can run them in secure spaces that are provisioned in the cloud. So, but if you've got a low volume of these things, it's a few people and they're doing this kind of ad hoc exploration, things like ChatGPT or Llama models that you're going to run locally can be fine. If it's a high volume, there are lots of people, or you actually want to store metadata, you're extracting information and you're going to put that into a database, then a product might be a good thing for you. It's important, though, to make sure that you sort of trust but verify. So really smart to extract content. So I might say, hey, language model, tell me who the companies are that are agreeing to form this joint venture. But I'd also like to keep a pointer back to the exact text in the document where you've pulled that information to enable human review. When it matters, which is going to be many cases, you need to have humans check the output. And you should always review LLM generated text by hand. I mean, there's all kinds of articles about lawyers getting in trouble in the early days of language models for just trusting the output. So the way I tend to think about it in domains where it is really important that the results are correct is that it's a force multiplier. Because I'll do an example on the next page where we look at a Supreme Court legal opinion. I just loaded it up. I found one, I loaded it up, and then I sort of really quickly kind of understood what was going on in it. So it is the kind of thing that can kind of give you superpowers for understanding the contents of a document and then generating new material based on it. So in the space of legal research, how can an LLM help? So case summarization, super useful to say, here's a legal opinion. Just give me a sort of a brief summary of it. You can also find relevant case law by analyzing similarities in legal principles, for example, right? So does this case involve the same legal principle as this other case? Are the fact patterns similar? Are the rulings similar? So that's it's a functionality that's been enabled by language models, right? To sort of understand similarities between legal principles or fact patterns is a thing that was very hard to do 10 years ago. You can identify and extract key arguments, comparing cases. So you can say, here's two cases. How are they similar? How are they different? Or potentially drafting briefs. So again, just one more time, bear with me. I'm going to dig through the Chat GPT and see what it does. So what I did was I went to I guess the Supreme Court has a website where they have all of their rulings, or at least a large number of them. And so I pulled an opinion down. I said, hey, please summarize this thing. And again, interestingly enough, the bolding is being created by the language model. And so this was the Supreme Court in Minerva Surgical versus Hologic Inc. They upheld a doctrine called assigner estoppel. I actually looked how to pronounce that. If I'm mispronouncing it and somebody out there knows, please correct me. And it had to do with sort of people who assign patents and then coming back and later challenging them. So it says the court limited the doctrine and so on, right? So there's literally like short sort of two sentences that summarize the opinion. So great, I've got this big document. This document's probably 30 pages long. Really good job of summarizing what's going on. Then you can say, what's the fact pattern in this case? And use just one sentence bullets, right? So the reason I added that is because when you ask for the fact pattern, it gives you this information, but it gives you a ton of additional stuff. So, you can look at this and go, okay, there's a person who invented a device, assigned the patent to a company. That patent portfolio was acquired by a later company. The person who invented or created the IP founded a new company, a competing device, and so on, right? So you can just sort of look through this thing. And I think there may be a few more elements in the fact pattern that aren't displayed here. But very quickly, you can go, here's the history of what's going on. Then you can also say, were there any dissents? If so, briefly summarize them. It goes, yep. Justice Alito said the court should decide whether to overrule Westinghouse rather than modifying the doctrine, right? So there's a Westinghouse case, which I'll look at in a second. And then these other justices said it's inconsistent with the Patent Act and should be abolished entirely, right? So the majority rule was that we would limit the scope of assign or estoppel. Some people said, well, that's fine, but you should get rid of it, or maybe we should go back and overrule. And so again, now I said, well, what's the Westinghouse case? And now this is super interesting. So it says the Westinghouse case, and it gives a bunch of information. And so this issue or this notion of assign or estoppel apparently occurred there first. Now, in this case, it's a really interesting question as to whether the LLM is using the text of the opinion, or is this information buried in the 1.8 trillion parameters that it has? And I think that's very important. So I wondered that myself, and I actually went and looked at the opinion and sort of dug through the text of it myself. And there is a discussion of this Westinghouse case in there. But this is an example where the LLM might be sort of going off on its own and going, oh, I know a lot about that case, and I'm just going to tell you what I know about it. And that's where you can start running into some danger. Okay. And then finally, you can say things like, well, okay, great. Well, how is this ruling going to impact the way companies handle their IP in the future? Just like give me little like bullets, right? So more cautious drafting of patent assignments, increased use of explicit disclaimers, greater scrutiny of continuation applications, and so on, right? So now you can say, okay, well, I'm a company that has a lot of IP that I've developed. I don't want to run afoul of this thing. How might this ruling cause me to conduct my operations differently? So lots of different elements of this can be pulled out of a language model. All right. So what are some considerations when you're doing this kind of work? So how big is the document? So remember I said in LLM, you take some text and it says, what's the probability of the next word? There are definitely limits on how big some text can be, although those limits are getting to be quite large, right? I mean, you can put giant documents in there. Could be the case that if a document is too large, or for other considerations, you might need to break it up into what are called chunks. So pages of a document could be separate chunks, and I'm going to retrieve the ones that are relevant. It is the case also that when you do summaries of large documents, you can imagine if I said, hey, you read War and Peace in high school. Summarize that for me. It's hard because it's a massive book. And so as the documents get large, the language model can start struggling with how to summarize it. And it's hard to know what's a good summary for a document that large. What do you care about? And information extraction from them can get to be difficult as well. And then this point that I made a minute ago about the document content versus the parameter content, right? So are the responses based on the text? Now you can say things like language model, only use content of the document when you tell me the answer to this question. But clearly the language model is using all of its parameters that make it facile with natural language, and sort of we all use background information when we're answering questions. And so so how much of the response is based on background knowledge, and how much of it is just sort of coming from those 1.8 trillion parameters, or 3 billion or 100 billion parameters, depending on what model you're using. And then you kind of have to be careful with logical extensions or implications of things, right? Because now you're sort of off in reasoning land. And sort of just be aware, am I looking for ideas about this is a possible implication, or am I really trying to sort of get A implies B and B implies C, so C is definitely going to happen? Those are the cases where you need to be a bit more careful. Okay. Then a couple more topics. Legal chatbots. So chatbots are all the rage. Actually, we've done a number of projects involving chatbots where what you do is you ingest content and then surface that to users. Those can be external facing. So we've had lots of people or lots of companies that have been interested in client engagement. So I'm an HR company and I would like my clients to be able to ask simple HR questions. In the legal domain, you could imagine a chatbot that does an initial consultation. So let me just elicit a bunch of information from you. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. It could be status updates on your case, right? So the language model can pull information about the case as it moves through the process and go like, here's what's going on and here are the next steps. You can also think about public legal assistance. So the way I think about the way I think about language models is what they've done is they've just democratized AI. So I don't know much about the law. I know a fair amount about AI, but anybody could upload a document to ChatGPT and just start asking questions about it and extracting information. So why not turn that around so that others, for example, people who have less access to financial resources, can get advice from a public-facing chatbot. It could also be internal facing, and I'll talk about agents in just a minute. So maybe I'm trying to help with billing and time tracking or case management or corporate training of some kind. So the sort of way chatbots tend to work is they use this method called retrieval augmented generation. And I'm not going to sort of talk through this in any detail, but the idea is I got a enterprise knowledge base. So I've got a bunch of documents. It's case law, or it is documents segregated by the cases, for example. And what happens is they can be PDFs, they can be Word documents, lots of the HTML, and they get ingested into a thing called a vector database. And what happens then is a user submits a query. That query gets transformed into the same structure that's in the vector database so that I can simply say, here's a question. How similar is it to all these little chunks of documents that I've got lying around, right? I can retrieve what are the most relevant chunks. And again, a chunk could be a paragraph, a page, it could be a chapter. And all that stuff gets then put into that some text, that prompt. And you say, hey, LLM, here's a question. Here's information that we think is relevant. Use this relevant information to generate an answer to that question. That very sort of conceptually simple thing can be used in lots of different ways simply by changing the documents that are being ingested and retrieved and sort of what the user is going to ask about it. So lots of considerations, though, especially in legal privacy. So you have to make sure that the documents are not ever going to be leaked. You have to have data security. You do need to worry about biases. So to the extent that bias exists in the data, that can be sort of promulgated forward to the responses that are being generated by the chatbot. And then there are these notion of guardrails. So like one thing that we've done before is to say, hey, we're going to have an LLM, literally have an LLM look at a question and say, hey, language model, this is what a simple question looks like, and this is what a hard question looks like. Do you think this is a simple or a hard question? And if it goes, I think it's a simple question, then you let the rest of that path complete and you'll retrieve and then generate an answer. If the LLM says, I think it's a hard question, then what you might do is to sort of hand that off to a human to answer it. And we've seen that pattern before. You should also have disclaimer like nothing I say should be construed as legal advice. I'm a chatbot. I don't know anything. And then give pointers to source material. So as I said earlier, I think it's important for you to say, hey, here's what I think. But if you want to check and be careful, go back and read this additional information. All right. And then the last topic is I want to talk about a case study in immigration that we did. So we worked with a client. We've been working with them for a number of years now, and I just wanted to sort of describe the problem that they were working on. So the idea is that it's a law firm, and they are helping people get visas. So very highly skilled individuals, helping them get visas to come into the country to work typically in high-tech jobs. And so it turns out that in like you might expect, sort of there's a lot of bureaucracy around this. The government's very careful about who they're letting in and what their qualifications are, and so there are controls in place. So there's a lot of work that's involved in sort of gathering documents from the person seeking a visa, preparing that information to send it back to the government. The government's going to come back with more questions, and so there's this very manual, sort of arduous back and forth that takes place. And it's also the case that these very highly skilled foreign nationals who are very tech savvy have high expectations around sort of what the experience is going to be like, right? They would expect the companies, these law firms that are working with them to be very technically savvy as well. So What we did was a number of things at this point, but one of the first things that we did was to say, all right, uh, a lot of time is being spent looking at documents that are being uploaded. So maybe I need to upload my passport, a driver's license, a resume, a variety of government forms. So those things are all being uploaded to a portal. And then a human is sort of looking at that going, okay, there's the person's resume, there's their passport. Well, that's the wrong sort of, man, we need the other side of the passport. And so what we wound up doing was, because this was done a number of years ago, was to use slightly older school technology. So we were using kind of classic machine vision methods coupled with text processing, where we would scrape the text out of a document, we would take the image, and we would kind of combine that information and then form classifiers that would say this is this kind of document or that kind of document. Interestingly enough, if we were to do it all over today, and actually the company is sort of moving that direction, the sort of language and image processing capabilities of these sort of vision language models or large language models has gotten to be so good that we think they can take over a lot of that work. But we successfully deployed it to a managed platform that had Databricks. We were doing OCR, machine vision, some simpler language models and APIs. And the result is that this thing is now in operation. Another sort of nice outcome of that was that we wrote a couple of research papers on it. So that work was cutting edge at the time. It's, as I said, sort of easier to do now, although it's not trivial. And so there's a great example of us coming in. There's a hard problem that needs to be solved. There's like an actual pain point. We applied AI. It actually went to production. And then we were able to sort of talk about that work to the broader kind of scientific community. All right, so what are a few final thoughts? Um, just one thing you do know about is I've got this slide that says everything old is new again. So you'll hear about agents or agentic AI or agentic systems. So I started graduate school in 1993. And back in 1993, there was all this work on multi-agent systems. And an agent is just like a computer program that's intelligent. And what if you get a bunch of smart computer programs working together? They can probably do things, right? That an individual can't. So you've got teams, and teams can collaborate, and they have different skills. The problem with multi-agent systems back then is the agents were all pretty dumb, as you can imagine, right? Like in the early to mid 90s, AI was a vibrant field, but it was nowhere near as powerful as it is today. And so when you hear about agents or agentic AI these days, all they mean largely is now the agents are incredibly smart. So now an agent, instead of being a little computer program that a grad student wrote, it's a full-blown large language model. So now what agents can do is they can do lots of things. They can actually use tools. So many, for example, when you ask a large language model to solve a math problem, often what they do is they write code to compute the answer to that. They hand it off, evaluate the code, and say, here's the answer back. That's an example of tool use. So these agents are smart enough to be able to call out to tools. They can talk to other language models. And so there's a tremendous amount of power in using language models collaborating. So as I said earlier, one of the things that we did was we used a language model to answer questions, and we used another language model to say, do I think this question is difficult or easy? We used other language models, for example, to say, is this question on topic? So if somebody's coming in and it's a legal chatbot, are they asking for a recipe for double chocolate brownies, for example, right? So when you have multiple sort of very smart agents interacting, they have the ability to call out to tools. They can remember what they've done before, and they have goals, and they can engage in planning in a really meaningful way. You get these very powerful systems. And so and I think the application in law is especially if what you've got internal processes. So I'm managing a case. I have a foreign national who's applying for a visa, and I've got to work through all these steps. You can imagine setting up these sort of agent-based systems that are going to manage that for you, sit on top of it, watch it, monitor progress, call out when things are slowing down. So it would be interesting, I think, to sort of look at that, especially in the context of the legal profession. And then, how to proceed. So last slide. I think if you're gonna sort of think about how to attack using AI, the classic thing is to say, what are your pain points? So do I have lawyers spending a ton of time on this task that seems like it ought to be able to be automated with AI? Then let's automate that thing and let the lawyers use their brains for more challenging things. Another way to think about it is kind of like, what's your secret weapon? Is there something that you do really well? And maybe if we got AI involved, we could do it even better and sort of extend our lead over the competition. There's always the question of kind of buy versus build. And the idea there is um, uh, buying or building could be more costly. It depends on sort of what it is. Time to deployment, I could buy a product and sort of roll it out pretty quickly. Or maybe what I want to do is build it and it's going to be slower, but I have more control over the features and I have more control over the data and the intellectual property. So, this idea of many systems out there are constructed in such a way um, that, so here's an example that's completely orthogonal to the law, but I went to the dentist recently and there was a sign about the AI-based dental solution that they were using. And so what it does is it sort of looks at X-rays and things and identifies, do you have a cavity or what's going on in there? And asked the hygienist, like, how's it work? And she said it was terrible. But what the system does is it lets the dentist or the hygienist correct its mistakes. It sends it back to, command central, and all that data is being used to be able to make that particular system better through time. So if I'm using a commercial product, are they slurping up my data and doing other things with it? What I would say also is that the pace of innovation in AI and in language models in general is just astonishing. So I have a grad student who came to me with an idea he was thinking about, and then he goes, "Oh, sorry, this paper came out yesterday, which like solved that problem." Now, innovation is going to continue, but the raw materials that you need to do really amazing things are here, and they are well developed enough that you can start doing great things. So, definitely not the time to kind of sit on the sidelines and wait for the dust to settle. And then, if you think about consultants, I think consultants in the AI space are great with ideation. So people who have a lot of experience with AI and applications of AI can sort of look at things and go, yeah, like that's feasible. We could actually solve that problem, or that's really hard. Maybe let's go after this other thing. They can rapidly build proof of concepts, really familiar with kind of best in breed open source solutions. So it is the case that the number of language models out there that you can download onto your computer and run them is growing every day. And so the question is, how do you manage the trade-off between something that you have locked down on your machine versus a thing that you're going to use out in the cloud? And then I think, kind of customization to your specific needs. So, um, I think with many AI solutions, they are great. They solve a problem, but do they solve your problem? And do they solve your problem really well? And so sometimes you have to build a kind of a custom solution. So, okay, that's it. Thank you. I appreciate you listening. Um, I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any, but I might need help from Sam to read them out to me if there are any.
Thanks, Tim. That was great. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them either in the chat or in the Q&A. Tim can answer them live. So we'll give everyone a minute or so to see if any come in before we wrap up. All right, I'm not seeing any in here, but we'll wait another minute or so. Any questions live for Tim?
Yeah, you can also reach out. I assume there will, Sam, I assume there'll be some email or something that goes out with the slides and some way to kind of reach back out if there are questions. Is that right?
Yep. We'll be sending out the webinar recording and the slides to everyone via email. And then we have an email address up there to reach out to Tim directly if you have any other questions or follow-up for him. So with that, we will end the presentation. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks again to Tim and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.